It's Britney, bitch.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere, like such as, and
we sitting here, I supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Out, Charlie! Out!
Our next door neighbors are foreign countries.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
Hello, everybody. I'm Giordano.
I'm Ben.
And we are joined by our good friend Kyle.
Giordano, did you say high-low?
I think you said high-low.
I think you blew it and you said high-low.
Yeah, I want to start off this episode by playing the high-low game with everybody, where we talk about our highs and lows for the week.
No, veto.
Anyway, we brought on our friend Kyle, who you may recognize from the Dan Brown episode. He's also a subject matter expert in 2000s rock, as he knows all three of the power chords, G major, C major, and D major. And today, Remember Shuffle is talking about Green Day's 2004 punk album, American Idiot. Released right before the 2004 re-election of George Bush, its anti-war message made it the quintessential protest album of the decade. Scooter, let's cue up a clip for everybody. No, Scooter, this is wrong. It's not it. It's similar. I can see why you did that, but no, American Idiot by Green Day. All right, no, it's a song from 2004. Have you forgotten when those towers fell? Scooter, it's an anti-war song. Going through a living hell, and you say you shouldn't worry about Bin Laden. All right, Scooter, that's enough. Anyway, we're sorry. We have an intern doing our soundboard.
English isn't his first language. He didn't grow up here, all right? So he's not really, he didn't have the same formative experiences that we all.
Right. He's from Canada.
He's Quebecois. Scooter. Anyway, after September 11th, the country was united, which is weird to think about now because, we're so culturally polarized, which we normally think of as bad. But after 9/11, we were united, just united in patriotic bloodlust. And speaking out against that bloodlust was getting people canceled for speaking out against the war in Iraq, most famously the Dixie Chicks. But it wasn't just conservatives doing this. Listen to this clip of Michael Moore getting booed at the Academy Awards by liberal Hollywood.
We live in a time where we have a man sending us to war for fictitious reasons, whether it's the fictition of duct tape or the fictitious of orange alerts.
It's truly unfathomable.
Yeah, we all as a society owe Michael Moore an apology. I do find him kind of annoying in a lot of ways, but man, he was a true Cassandra on this one. He told the truth and was tragically not believed.
Yeah, and the Dixie Chicks.
They're just the chicks now, dude.
Right, sorry.
It's pretty surreal listening to the Michael Moore clip, and just because you know the audience and you know that it's like, I don't know, Samuel L. Jackson booing him for this, and all the other, like you said, liberal Hollywood.
It's Woody Allen going, boo! Boo this man.
Yeah, it's just a room filled of sex criminals. Harvey Weinstein, Woody Allen, Bryan Singer. They're all booing this man's immoral position.
For speaking out against orange alerts.
Yeah. So anyway, society at large was traumatized into bloodlust. Like we were really just in like a jingoistic trance. And this album was a defiant middle finger to George Bush. And it was also a rock opera telling a totally separate 3-act story of suburban angst. So it's incredibly ambitious, which is crazy because this was all coming from Green Day.
Yeah, a band maybe most famous for a song about, for naming their band after smoking weed all day and having a song called Longview that's just about masturbating all day. Not exactly the keen, shrewd, political, analytical minds that you might expect to drop this album.
Yeah, their best-selling album was called Dookie, which in their words is a reference to the band members often suffering from diarrhea, which they referred to as liquid dookie. So this is the band writing the quintessential protest album of our time.
Yeah, and I think it's as we get going, it's worth just like stressing how popular this album was. If you look at a chart of the 20 best-selling albums of the decade, only 3 of them are even adjacent to rock. Guitar, bass, drums, whatever. And the three bands are Green Day, Nickelback, and Linkin Park. So of the three rock bands that are in the top 20, only one of them is kind of political. Everything else is mostly pop. You got Avril Lavigne's up there in the top 20. Nora Jones is number 3, which is just absolutely hilarious to me, because if you put a gun to my head, I couldn't name one Nora Jones song. It'd be like, the one you hear in the elevator, I guess. But this sold like crazy. It won the Grammy for Best Rock Album that year. It almost won Best Album, but it lost out to, and here's a blast from the past, a posthumously released final album by Ray Charles. People had Ray Charles fever in the early 2000s because there was the Ray Charles movie with Jamie Foxx. Just absolute robbery, because also nominated that year were Kanye West's College Dropout and Usher's Confession and American Idiot, and instead they gave it to just a compilation CD of Ray Charles.
They shouldn't be allowed to give out those awards until like 10 years later.
Oh yeah, like the best album of the year?
Yeah, even movies. There's no awards. So like 10 years goes by. That way you can see like...
Right, yeah, everything retrospect.
I like that idea. It also gives you an incentive to live another decade.
Is there something you need to talk about?
No, I'm good.
Yeah, it was on the radio constantly. There's like 5 or 6 singles from this album, and all of them were continuously being played. Like you basically could tune in and just hear like Green Day, Green Day, Green Day, Green Day. Because even like American Idiot, which I'm sure was the first one, stayed in rotation for so long that it would have been on the radio at the same time as the other like 5 songs.
If you don't know, Green Day is a trio that's made up of 3 guys, all with very dumb stage names. You got a drummer who goes by the name of Trey Cool. That's spelled T-R accent aigu, like the French. Kind of like the French word tray for very, but also spelled incorrectly. You got a bassist by the name of Mike Dirnt. He chose that last name. That's the one that I really assume must have been a given name, because who in their right mind would ever choose the stage name Dirnt? And of course, the untouchable, the sneering, bug-eyed, weird-looking dude.
Short king.
Billy Joe Armstrong. Is he short?
He's very petite, I think. Like, I don't know. He certainly looks, when he holds a guitar, which he's usually doing, it looks very large compared to him. So I'm pretty sure he's quite tiny.
A short bisexual king by the stage name of Billy Joe Armstrong.
Yeah. And just preparing for this, we struggled so much with his name, or I did anyway, just because I have a hard time saying Billy Joe Armstrong without saying like Billy Joel or, Billy Joe Louis Armstrong or something. But Billy Joel Armstrong sounds pretty cool. That's a nice combination, I think. It would sound a little something.
Kyle, we prepared a very, very dumb bit, and we found no way to segue into it seamlessly.
What is it?
So, I mean, basically the idea is it's just Billy Joe Armstrong, but you make his name other stupid things. So like Billy Joel Armstrong, and it's some folks need to get away, take a holiday from the President Gas Man.
We got Billy Joe Louis Armstrong, so it's something unpredictable, but in the end it's right. I hope you had a wonderful life.
Isn't Billy Joe, that's not a stage name, is it?
Yeah, it has to be.
No, I think that's his real name.
No.
I'm pretty sure that's just his name.
That's his Christian name.
Damn. Our apologies to Billy
Joe. To the Joe Armstrong family.
Apparently of Italian heritage.
No
Italian
way.
Armstrongs.
Damn, I have newfound respect. Let me fact check. Scooter, can we get a fact check on Billy Joe Armstrong being Italian? Yeah, holy shit. Oh my God. His dad's name is Andrew Marciano Armstrong. Sweet.
I think I read something about him getting I don't know if it was like an honorary mayorship or something. He got to go back to where his great-great-grandparents in Italy. And obviously it's some small town, and they're just excited, understandably, that anyone kind of from there is known and popular. And I think there is some whole celebration of him there.
Now, what about it? How about Italian Green Day? And it's like, when the moon hits your eye, like a big pizza pie.
It's got to be something. Billy Joe Parmesan Strong.
Oh, there it is. All right.
How about Billy Joe Biden Armstrong? And he's like, come on, man. You see Kyle, the President Gas Man, you'll be on a holiday. That's my son, Hunter. He's the son of Raging Love. He's the Jesus of gonorrhea.
You guys hear about old what's her name? Oh damn. Oh man. What's her name?
Come on, man. Hey, listen here, Mac. Here comes the rain again. He used to be a Falls from the Stars.
The song is St. Jimmy, but it's just about corn pop. corn pop is coming down across the alleyway, and he was a bad dude.
Guys, just listen, wake me up when September ends. Sir, it's March.
You heard me.
Anything else here? Billy Madison Armstrong.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Shabba shabba-doo, when masturbation's lost its fun, you're fucking lonely. I imagine most of this we're gonna cut, but
yeah.
It's good to have options.
You gotta swing on it.
Yeah. This way we'll have it. Moving on. So let's just talk about the album and the music and like American Idiot as a protest album. Because I think Green Day is this hinge band in the transition from punk to what would later be the highly divisive genre of pop punk. And I think they make the transition. They start out with a lot of cred with all of these East Bay punk bands. And they're one of the first to sign on to a major label in 1994. And part of their appeal in this transition from like real punk to pop punk is that they wrote songs about girls. They wrote songs about smoking weed and being a slacker and what have you. This was part of the draw. So if you compare it to other kinds of punk music, like stuff from the Explosion in the late 70s, like the Clash or the Sex Pistols, these were very, very explicitly political songs. Or even if you compare it to less mainstream punk bands of the same era, like Anti-Flag has been punk forever and has been political forever. Or even like, while not necessarily punk, like Rage Against the Machine was writing political tunes this entire time. So you have this band that's like known for not doing anything kind of political, and here they come with this album. And what I find so interesting about it is that it's a political album that doesn't really say anything. It's kind of like a lot of political keywords that you mad lib into a song. Words like propaganda and media and alienation, and you kind of just put them into a mad lib and come out with a song that sounds really challenging, but just doesn't say a whole lot.
Yeah, and they never name anybody. Like it's ostensibly a George Bush protest record that never names him, never names anyone in administration.
Do you need to name people though? Like, I don't know. I feel like actually things are, I listen to a lot of protest music from this era. And actually a lot of the stuff that doesn't work typically was stuff that was very explicit about what was going on. Like Fortunate Son is a great protest song and like, it doesn't name anybody. It doesn't say Vietnam. I go back and forth on like the idea that they had to be more explicit because there's a lot of explicit protest songs from this era, like Eminem talking about wanting to murder George Bush. That was not good.
I thought that worked nicely.
And also, it does, like, if you go too hard, it makes it of its time. And I mean, you can dodge that problem where, like, the Dead Kennedys' California Uber Alice is still an awesome punk song. Even though they called their shot that Jerry Brown was going to be president of America, they were so sure about it. And they wrote a song about the lib-fash state under President Jerry Brown, which, you know, didn't happen, but it still works. But, like, imagine a punk song like When We All Lost Our Minds from 2016 to 2020, and everyone knew the name of every single member of the Trump cabinet. No, it's bad when you know the name of the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. It's like, you know things are bad when you know each and every fucking person. It's probably because you're watching too much news. And it's probably also because it's like everyone has a news cycle. But imagine a punk song that was like an anti-Rex Tillerson punk song. Or like one of these Trump guys that was there for like a fucking minute. Yeah, it would age like fine milk, I'm sure. And I think this is clearly what they're going for. The vagueness is to try and make it have some longer legs.
Well, I guess that's a good question then. And I agree, it being more open and not being specific isn't a bad thing. And I'm also wondering, like, do you guys think that it have lasting impact? Like, does it feel relevant today? Because
I think the problem is like it's too vague. Like Fortunate Son is pointing out something very obvious. It's like rich people's hypocrisy about the draft, right? About the draft and about service generally.
It's also a really good song, which is maybe
also, just a banger.
Maybe a key difference.
I'll play Billy Joe's advocate here. I'll say that Holidays, I think, is my favorite song from this album. And it's very similar in that it's also written tongue-in-cheek, right? You're taking on the position that you're making fun of and saying, hey, I'm on a holiday. I'm throwing bombs around and just doing whatever I want. I'm acting like a I don't know, a global idiot.
Why didn't they call it Global Idiot?
Yeah, I kind of fumbled that one, didn't I? The word is right there that I wanted to use. Oh, man. I don't know. I just don't know that I hold music responsible for making change. I just think music is just responsible for like making people feel better. Now, on the other hand, this is a massively popular protest album released a couple months before the 2004 election. And the 2004 election is the only election since 1988 that the Republicans won a majority. So clearly it did like nothing.
Yeah, I think we should probably talk about that, like the context that it actually came out in, like the timing and like the Rock Against Bush and all this stuff.
Right. Okay. So there was this event one day called September 11th that happened.
No, we gotta start earlier. In the 1980s, America flooded Afghanistan with guns and weapons.
So anyway, Bush is elected in 2000. September 11th happens in 2001. We invade Afghanistan, and we have so much bloodlust that a couple years later, in March of 2003, we invade Iraq. And I don't know if you guys, I definitely felt at the time that they were related. I'm like, oh yeah, we're like at war in the Middle East, and this is just like an extension of something we're already doing. Like it didn't really feel like a new thing.
Right. We were 13, so I don't know. I feel like I also felt that, but I knew nothing about anything.
One of the big, I guess, controversies of the era is that the administration lies, making this connection between 9/11 and Iraq, even though literally we now know from internal documents or whatever that the week of September 11th they were already planning on bringing the war to Iraq, and the media just absolutely goes along with it. When Giordano talks about how the society was united in patriotic bloodlust, the stupid Fifth Estate, the precious democracy dies in darkness crew of the Washington Post was just reprinting exactly what the Bush administration said. They absolutely whiffed the ball. Like there were so few anti-war voices, and it's very hard to stress now because the libs control so much of culture and the media and what have you. But at this particular moment, in the first Bush term, there is so little opposition to this war. Even John Kerry, who runs against Bush, Mr. Reporting for Duty, his whole thing was like, okay, we're just gonna like hand it over to like the UN peacekeepers, but we're not gonna like pull out and do whatever, right? He voted for the Iraq war. A ton of Democrats did as well.
Yeah, so at first I thought this album was stupid. Like you said, Ben, this stuff doesn't accomplish anything. It just gives people a chance to feel like they're doing something, but it's just an aesthetic. It's not actual political action. I think a lot of what happens to us now is tainted by the 60s, where you had this generation of baby boomers buying into these amazing protest songs, about the times they are changing and imagine. And most of them just grew up to be like just as selfish and destructive and greedy as previous generations.
But did you hear that they didn't start the fire?
It was always burning.
It was always burning.
Yeah, that's like apparently why Gen X people are so cynical is because they viewed the baby boomers as like wanting to start a revolution, and that just giving away to like the greed is good era of the 80s by the time they were in their 30s and 40s. Mm-hmm. So, but it got me thinking that things are so shitty right now in terms of what you can actually do to rectify the ills of the world. What can you actually do to stop an unjust war, right? Like what can you actually do to stop Roe v. Wade from being overturned? Nothing. Like we live in a political system that is full of anti-democratic institutions, heavily influenced by money. And so there's basically nothing people can do. And making a good and catchy protest song is like the only thing you can do to like have some kind of catharsis and give people a voice. It's either that or like go on Twitter and try and cancel someone. Those are like the two options that you have to make yourself feel better. So it gave people a voice to clarify like what they were seeing in the culture around them. And that's a good thing. And maybe it was all the other artists that fucked up, because if Green Day's American Idiot is one of several protest songs, I think it's a fine song. The problem is that this is it. I think there's one other good protest song from the era.
Oh no.
What, did that not play? Damn. Oh, well, I'll put that in post. Sorry, guys. Fucking Scooter. God damn it.
It's good. Yeah.
If we could find another intern who worked for free, we would fire your ass right now, Scooter.
Okay, here we go. Ready?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Eminem had his protest song. Pearl Jam had a protest song. And after the 2004 election, I think everybody just like lost hope, because at that point there's nothing you can do. Like you're locked in for another 4 years. And so all the protest songs you get after 2004 are like, damn, I can't wait till this shit is over. Like John Mayer's Waiting on the World to Change, or For Now by Avenue Q.
Just gotta white knuckle our way through this, y'all. I know the Iraqis are dying by the hundreds of thousands, but listen, we voted as hard as we could, okay? Yeah, I guess, okay, here's my counterpoint. I'm going to be a little bit obtuse. Like, is this really a protest album? Like, what is it protesting?
The fucking media, man.
Yeah, exactly. It just gestures towards politically sounding words. But when you listen to these guys talk about it, I watched this very boring documentary that was mostly raw footage of recording this album. But I have a couple quotes from Billy Joe Armstrong, who I believe is the founding father of a movement I like to call the bird brain left, which is vaguely left, but they lack the ability to think. And so this is a quote from Billy Joe. Quote, I think that politically in this record, we don't really have an agenda. We're just not saying, this politician is wrong, this is wrong, blah, blah, blah. So it's a political album that is not identifying any political ills. We've got that off the bat. Continuing. It's saying, amongst all the different medias and in today's society right now, with all the media being swayed in one direction and the other, and all the information being thrown at you, and then throw this war on top of it, it's saying we've had enough. And we're ready to say, you know what? I feel confused and disenfranchised. And as individuals, we're losing our individuality.
Yeah,
awful.
I'm kind of coming around to your point now. Because you're right. Like, I'm trying to think about what actually like American Idiot is saying. And like, it's not. So Fortunate Son is pointed at an actual problem, which is that like people like George Bush can have special access to the National Guard and don't have to die. BYOB actually has that same point. Yep. Why do they always send the poor? But you're right that I can't actually say what American Idiot or Holiday are against. Holiday is gesturing towards like, hey, we shouldn't be so reckless over there.
Can we simmer down, y'all?
Where it's like we're acting like we're on vacation.
Like the bridge in Holiday where it's spoken words like "Big Howl to the president."
Big Howl to the president, gas man.
So apparently, the quote I read from Billy Joe that bridge was as twisted as possible and a politician's worst nightmare. Which I think again speaks to like kind of where they really approach this from, and and at the same time, I also think like that's maybe some of the accidental brilliance of the album and like why it actually was so popular, because they do represent just how like a lot of normal felt and like alienated people in the suburbs who don't really have a complex understanding of what is going on, have the vague sense of like things are bad and I have no ability to influence this, and politicians or whoever, people do not have my best interests at heart and doing these terrible things and there's nothing that I can do. And like fundamentally that is what the album is about, and by the time you hit the end of it, the arc of the story, it is just back to square one and like giving up basically. And so it's really like the timing of it coming out like 2 months before the election, in the midst of this huge that was going Rock Against Bush trying to overturn that or sway things, which of course failed spectacularly. They kind of nailed it. Like, because like you said, Giordano, like right after that election, everyone was like, well, fuck, never mind. And that's basically the album follows that story. A character who, well, fuck it, never mind. I guess I'll go back home and be miserable.
Yeah, it barely mentions the war. It doesn't really say where the problems come from. It's like, I live in the suburbs and I feel bad. The main point of the album is that the vibes are off, y'all. We gotta fix the vibes.
Which was true. As kids who grew up in the suburbs, I think we authoritatively say the vibes were not good.
I have another Billy Joe quote that I want to read. Again, what I learned researching this is listening to critics talk about art is so much better than listening to the creators talk about their own art. We should stop listening to all artists. They're just jesters. They're just good at this one thing.
This is dead.
So yeah, please. Let's accelerate that.
In a metaphorical sense, but okay.
Yeah. So quote from Billy Joe, I think for a lot of people, when they're younger, it's like people are so driven on these certain Freudian impulses or whatever. So, especially young males where they lash out and it becomes something that's about like their parents or their fathers or something like that. I think ultimately when you become a man, you sort of have to face those dangers a little bit more. I mean, you don't have to get rid of the danger, but I think what's the exciting thing about getting older is that for the first time, you're confronting that danger. And that's kind of what the album's really turning into.
What?
The bird brain left, everyone.
Yeah. Listen, the bird brain left kind of remembers what someone told him about Freud while smoking weed one time, and it's really informing his art.
Oh man.
Well, then there was the other quote where apparently just before they actually went to tour the album, they specifically put out a statement along the lines like, "Hey man, we're gonna leave the politics at home. We're just here to bring the party and rock out." Like, well, but I thought that was the thing.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, man, I think this is one area where they kind of did have the finger of the pulse of like not getting canceled and giving people enough of what they want. Like the vibes are bad, something's off with our politics, but not going too far. Like in this shitty documentary, Heart Like a Hand Grenade, like the people from the label, they're trying to generate a small controversy. So they're talking about the album art. It's like, why don't we just put George Bush's face on it? Just come right there and say it. American Idiot, here's his face. And Billy Joe's like, no, it's not about that. It's not about that at all. We want something simple. And sure enough, that Heart Like a Hand Grenade cover, that's iconic, as the youth would say.
Interesting.
Things are bad, and I don't really know why or who's to blame. Or what to do. Cool, man. Thanks.
Well, and like the solutions offered by the album are do lots of drugs, alienate your friends, hit rock bottom, and then return to the suburbs.
Woohoo!
The solutions, I guess, are to like tune out of the media, which would presumably also include rock music. But cable news, like I don't. Yeah, you're right. Just like this one nation. What's the line? One nation controlled by the media.
Yep.
A subliminal mindfuck America.
It's the information age of hysteria, y'all.
God, I've really come around to your point. This is so vague. It's like, what exactly? CNN? What is it exactly?
So, what are all of our personal experiences with this album? I mean, Kyle, I know you and I like played a bunch of these songs together as youths.
Yeah, hell yeah, dude. In your basement in the suburbs.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this album ruled. I could play most of the songs on guitar. I mean, I'm not gonna learn how to play Extraordinary Girl or whatever. Like there's some definitely middling tracks on this thing, but
misogyny is showing.
Nice. We'll talk about the gender politics in the when we talk about the rock opera part of it. But yeah, and I was convinced, like, I feel like in the 2000s, in the early 2000s especially, you had this very conscious awareness that there wasn't much good rock music around anymore. This was something that the Gen X uncle demographic was very concerned with. And like, the 60s, you had the Beatles, the 70s had Zeppelin, the 80s had Van Halen, the 90s had Nirvana, and what do we have now? It's like conscious awareness of the canon of rock and roll, and where are we now? Because rock and roll, just objectively, is not as popular in the mainstream as it used to be. And I think part of that is the rise of like R&B as a more mainstream genre, and of course hip hop and rap cutting out their own kind of space in the mainstream. And I was convinced that Green Day was the next Nirvana, man. This was they should be in that same category of the Gen X uncles typology or what have you.
They are.
And I think the problem with the stupid Gen X uncle typology is that it totally ignores like indie rock, which I think with the hindsight that we're talking about, indie rock is the major development of the decade in rock. It's the White Stripes, it's the Strokes, it's the Arctic Monkeys, it's fucking Vampire Weekend shit. I'll throw them in there. They just don't have the mainstream success.
There's two successful types of rock in the 2000s, I think, mainstream wise. There's pop punk, and like the emo rock and indie rock. And that's what we have instead of Nirvana or hair metal or something.
Yeah. Jordana, what were your personal experiences with this thing? Did you ever obsessively listen to Boulevard of Broken Dreams after a teenage breakup?
No. This wasn't my go-to. This is like in the era of my life, which I call the Mongolian Grill era, where I was working at the Mongolian Grill and just listening to two radios at once because of the nature of being in a restaurant. And yeah, just Boulevard of Broken Dreams just constantly played on a loop. In a restaurant, you have front of house music, which is played to customers, and you have heart of house music that's played to the kitchen. And this is like music that you would hear in the kitchen just all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I fucking love this album. It's funny. I listened to it like 1,000 times in the way that you do when you're 13, 14 and become obsessed with a new album, and could play all the songs, and definitely had that vague sense, like angry and sort of dissatisfied. But looking back, I also like fundamentally didn't get it. I think like I knew it was a rock opera, but that meant nothing to me. And I also never really made any attempt to trace this story in the album. Like that didn't matter to me. I didn't care about it. Like that,
Really? I assumed you guys were obsessed with that because you would always tell me it was like a rock opera.
I definitely thought that's part of what made this so genius. I was like, it has this political message and also this awesome story about three people, precisely three characters.
Like I knew there was a story, but I definitely didn't care about it that much. The fact that there's kind of that like Fight Club element of like, oh, is he Jimmy? Like I don't think that connected for me at all because I wasn't paying that close attention. And I think Green Day, like I liked they were fucking catchy, and the imagery was amazing, and I remember all the music videos. It's so cool. But I didn't have that many thoughts about the Iraq War at the time, so I think it was hard. I think that's part of why I liked it for the music. music and the imagery, and I thought they were like cool, and I was like, oh, it's so cool that they're doing this like big dramatic thing. But I don't think I got it. Like in retrospect, I don't think I actually understood.
Yeah, it was like a gateway drug to other pop punk emo stuff. You smoke a little Boulevard of Broken Dreams, and before you know it, you're injecting cute without the E. And I'm not okay. Open parentheses. I promise. Close parentheses.
I told someone this morning that I was recording a Green Day American Idiot podcast, and she said she just went, "Where are you?" And I'm so sorry. And I was like, that's close, but that's not.
I was also I was like obsessed with the album. I saw them perform. Like I saw the tour, and it was amazing. And they put on a hell of a show.
Green Day? Well, when was this?
It must have been in 2005. Like I doubt that I saw them like for tour, but I think it was Jimmy Eat World and Green Day.
Nice.
In Detroit?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Hell yeah, dude.
And like,
tell us a bit about the pageantry.
Well, all the imagery is obviously just built right in. So like they had all the projections, bombs and the tanks, heart grenades and all of that. But the one thing that I really remember, which is like, I think Billy Joe has done this forever, is he'll call someone up on stage out of the crowd, have them play a song on a guitar, and then give them the guitar. And I remember being like 14 and being like, maybe I'll get the guitar. But of course I was in like the nosebleed seats. So like, unless you pulled out a telescope and was like, oh, the gentleman in like double X153, come on down. That was obviously not going to happen.
You, the blonde child.
So someone came up to me, they were like registering people vote and big push and like get the Democrats in. And I thought it would be funny as a Canadian who is not 18 to be like, sure, man, and fill out the registration. And I just made up a name and address, right? And then I remember getting home and telling this to your parents, Ben, and your dad just turning to me going, that's a felony. Like very seriously, and me being like, "Oh shit, don't
Scooter, cut all this, Scooter."
And me just being like, "Well, don't tell anyone."
Yeah, don't put my dad's name on the pod, please.
Leave that out.
I have one more point about protest music. I just want to talk about protest music in the Trump era because, according to the liberal media, we lived under an even bigger monster than George Bush recently, which is totally not true. And I was like, surely there must have been some kind of Trump protest music. And there's so much. I had no idea how much Trump protest music existed, even though I couldn't think of any of it. And it's because it's all bad. Like Green Day wrote an anti-Trump song. I don't know if you guys know this. Have you heard about this, folks? Yeah, you want to talk about their vague political message. Their anti-Trump song is called Troubled Times. And the chorus is, we live in troubled times. We live in troubled times.
Yeah, I think also like punk needs to kick back against something. And like we talked about, like 2004 was that sweet spot where there was a growing anti-Bush sentiment, but it still wasn't mainstream or majority yet. So they snuck right in there. But like, oh, you hate Trump too? Liberal musician? Get in fucking line.
I think that's why it's so hard to make a punk song about like anti-Trump, because it's not anti-establishment. It is the establishment is to hate Trump, right? Like, oh, you're going to make a punk song that's on the same side as Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden? That sounds really cool. That sounds like exactly what the fucking dead Kennedys would do.
Yeah, there's a totally apocryphal story that I remember reading in like, I don't know, Spin or one of these music magazines where Billy Joel Armstrong, someone asked him to define punk and he kicked over a garbage can and garbage went flying everywhere on the street. He's like, that's punk. And then his interlocutor kicks over a garbage can and says, so that's punk? And Billy Joel Armstrong went, no, now it's trendy, which is the idea like you always need to like do something new, something different, which probably explains why at 32 years old, they all started wearing eyeliner and matching outfits and been like, yep, this is who we are now.
I want to play a couple examples of the protest music from the Trump era. So this is by Death Cab for Cutie. It's probably the best anti-Trump song. I mean, in the fact that like it stayed in my head the longest.
Nobody makes it on their own without $1 million loan. You reap what you've sown from $1 million loan. Call your father on the phone, get that $1 million loan.
You get it?
There's that electric energy I associate with Death Cab for Cutie.
I listened to probably about 10 anti-Trump songs from Arcade Fire, Death Cab for Cutie, Green Day. That's probably the best one I could find. Here's Snoop Dogg's.
The president said he wants to make America great again. Fuck that shit, we gonna make America crip again, cuz.
I was trying to think about like what was the epitome of protest songs now, like in 2020, and I think I found it. So I'm just gonna play it for you guys.
Imagine there's no heaven. Easy if you try.
No hell below us.
Okay, I have always fucking hated Imagine because again, nothing material in it. It's just nothing materialist. Just imagine if there were no problems.
You know, dum-dums always say that like oppression gives us good art. People would say that when Trump was elected, like, oh, comedy's going to get so much better. Or like the war in Iraq is at least going to give us good protest music. But if trading the war in Iraq was for this album, then that was one of the worst trade deals of all time.
We're talking Alaska Purchase Pad here, folks.
And listening to a lot of those songs from the early 2000s, like on the other side, the conservative songs, like the pro-war songs. It's funny because they weren't exactly pro-war, but they were anti-war. So they were saying like, oh, like all these people who are saying we shouldn't go to war, like, have you forgotten? Have you forgotten what happened? Right? One of the funniest lyrics from that Have You Forgotten song that I played, by the way, is like,
they say we don't realize the mess we're getting in.
People say, like the anti-war people say that we don't know what we're getting into. That hits so well 20 years later.
Yeah.
We're still in Afghanistan.
They sure were correct.
You know, one thing that I think is also forgotten, I feel like a lot of people who are like younger now and grew up fully post 9/11, post Iraq War, all of that, are like, yeah, I guess that was bad. You know, that's maybe the understanding that they have is like, oh, we fucked up there. It's catastrophic. The death toll for civilians in Iraq is like 1 million. It's a country that has been destroyed and will never recover, right? Like that's what was going on. And I think when you really think of how horrific it actually was, and then realize that like this is the best that came out in terms of pushing back on a genocide, basically, pretty bleak. A pretty bleak situation.
Yeah, and we talk a lot on this pod about how like apolitical this decade was, and I kind of just want to take like a quick moment to define what we mean. And maybe the best way to do that is with like a contrast between then and now, or like especially post-Trump, something like late night comedy becomes super political in a very boring way. Stephen Colbert has extended monologues about Senate procedure. If you ever want to hear stand-up comedy about the Senate parliamentarian or the filibuster rules, because now you can. What's crazy is that in this snake eating its own tail cultural media landscape, first Stephen Colbert had a bit about abolishing the filibuster. Then he had one about just getting rid of the whole Senate because it's so undemocratic. And right-wing Twitter went fucking nuts. They're like, Stephen Colbert is an anti-democratic authoritarian for wanting to abolish the Senate. It's like, who gives a shit? He's a fucking comedian. And this is, I guess, like maybe a little bit of an overcorrection. I don't want to put 2000s late night up on a fucking pedestal here, but this is something like stupid Jay Leno complains about. The only kind of political jokes he had to make was Bush is stupid and Clinton is horny. And he complains that at how political everything has gotten. But back then, there was so little political content because there was just so much consensus. There was so much bad consensus. This is the thing that gave us Joe Biden, who for most of his career was an anti-choice Democrat.
Supported the war in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever heard of the median voter theorem?
No.
It's the basic premise that neoliberalism operates on, and it's the idea that the person that you want to run should appeal to the median voter. Because imagine every voter is on a spectrum. If you appeal to the median voter, then you have that person and everyone to the right of them or everyone to the left of them. So you have half plus one, right? And I feel like during this era, you know, both parties were running on that system. That's why like John McCain is the maverick. He's the guy who's sort of like outside of the Republican, or like people that the Democrats put up, like, I mean, even like Bill Clinton did a lot of gesturing to the right. They're trying to capture the other party's base. And now the Democrats are still doing that, but the Republicans are not.
Yep.
And the median voter theorem's getting defrauded because what's happened is the Republicans actually stand for something and the Democrats don't. They're appealing to like the middle voter. And so all they are is like anti-Republican. When we talk about the era being apolitical, it's this era of focus on the median voter theorem. And just to illustrate how apolitical things were at the time, I think it's funny to remember that at this time, when the album comes out, New York State and California and New York City, both of those states have Republican governors, and New York City has a Republican mayor. And it's like that for for the majority of the decade.
They elected Bloomberg 3 fucking times. They amended the city constitution to let this billionaire dwarf run a third time because his term limit was coming up right as the financial crash was happening. And he's like, well, as the guy who invented the Bloomberg terminal, you need to change the city constitution to let me run a third time. And they did.
It's you can't even imagine a situation now where a Republican would be in charge of New York State or California or New York City, and where one of those things would be true. Back then it was all three. And another funny thing I found about like the historical context of this album is listening to all those country songs about like, you know, Have You Forgotten? There's so many country and like songs and like sort of right-leaning songs that are about empathizing with and sympathizing with New York City, saying like, how fucking dare you do that to New York City, which is like probably the only time in the history of the United States have people from the hinterlands been like, how dare you do that to New York? Because I feel like if a terrorist attack were to happen in New York now, they'd be like, good. Fuck those people. And it's so weird to be like, oh, people liked New York back then.
Yeah, for a brief window. And I mean, you can see it in like the Simpsons episode where they go to New York. It's like, New York, we used to understand New York is not America. New York and America hate each other. And then all of a sudden, post 9/11, they all pretended to like it.
Okay, so I think that's all we have for Green Day as a protest album.
Hell yeah. Okay, are we ready to get back at it? Talk about the musical aspect?
Yes, let's do it. Let's get into the beautiful rock opera, which I'm glad that we decided to do, because I don't know what's wrong with my brain. I'm not good at deciphering cryptic meaning at all. So I had to listen to a lot of album reviews.
Okay, in your defense, Jordano, this thing's barely a rock opera.
Yeah, so what's everybody's favorite track from the album?
I gotta go with I kind of do gotta say American Idiot, just the title track. It has some really nice contrasts between really fast, really tight, and then very sloppy.
Yeah, that distorted like first riff from the song is so iconic.
As I was telling you before we were recording, like the thing that sucks most about this album for me, I love doing karaoke, and the two best songs on this album, Holiday and American Idiot, both have the homophobic F slur in them, so I can't sing them at karaoke.
Yeah, that's a very of the era thing. I feel like people were pretty liberal with that slur.
Yeah, well, the idea of like, yeah, I'm using it, but I'm using it to make a point, so it's fine.
Right.
Also, Billy Joe Armstrong is bisexual, so I think that means he's allowed.
He's also 5'7", so he is a short king. In fact, Scooter came back with information. Being 5'7" and being bisexual, that's sort of like the same thing in terms of being part of the short community and then being part of like the LGBTQ community. It's like, okay, yeah, I guess you qualify, but you're barely.
It's certainly taking a moderate position on both stances.
And I don't mean to do bi erasure or 5'7" erasure, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
How about y'all? What are y'all's favorite tracks?
Holiday for me. It's the one I listen to the most. It's on my workout playlist, and I just think it's good fun. It's about going on holiday. It's about getting together with your friends and going on a holiday together. It's funny, yeah, it's not political and it's not part of the rock opera. It's just about having a good time on vacation.
Yeah, all of the best songs on the album have nothing to do with the stupid rock opera. Okay. With maybe the exception of Jesus of Suburbia. That's not a bad song, and that really lays the groundwork for the rock opera. Kyle, how about you? Favorite track?
Yeah, I think I have to go with American Idiot too. I like the.
Oh man, we're doing the least deep cut analysis of this album of all time.
Oh, sorry. Did you want me to say letter bomb? I can say letter bomb.
Yo, it's like really underrated.
Yo, give me Novocaine. Yeah, sorry. Let's actually talk about the plot of the rock opera. That's as much as I love to talk about our favorite major singles from this album. So American Idiot tells the story of three characters. One fella by the name of Jesus of Suburbia. He's the son of rage and love, grew up on soda pop and Ritalin. Jesus of Suburbia leaves his suburban upbringing to go to the big city, where he meets Saint Jimmy, who teaches him how to do drugs, and I think self-harm is implied.
Yeah, I think the baser point is that Saint Jimmy sort of gets him to indulge himself in all of his like baser emotions, like anger and drug use, things that just like feel good now.
To use Billy Joe's Freud.
It's such a dumb fucking name. I feel bad because I recently learned it's his Christian name, but every time we say it, we flub it.
Yeah.
Use William Joseph's Freud reference. Jimmy's the id incarnate. Really, the pure, unbridled acceptance of your baser need, baser.
Yes, but then in the city, Jesus of Suburbia falls in love with a beautiful woman who is literally named What's Her Name. He falls in love with What's Her Name, who we learn is a rebel and also a saint, as the lyrics to She's a Rebel say. And then the end of the story is that Saint Jimmy kills himself, and Jesus of Suburbia does not get the girl and moves back home. And the closing track of the album is called What's Her Name? And Billy Joe says he's sitting here wondering how What's Her Name has been. This is kind of like what Kyle alluded to about what kind of a program does the album offer. It's a pretty take the long way home kind of route. Go back to exactly where you started.
Settle into like a working class office pointless job and reminisce. Although you did glaze over the Fight Club-esque component of it, we find out that Saint Jimmy is in fact an alter ego of Jesus, not in fact a distinct character.
I think that that's not in the actual text. I think they fleshed that out in the stupid musical. But I never got the Fight Club angle when I was a teenager listening through this.
Well, he says it's a suicide. I think it's
I thou't Saint Jimmy just legit killed himself.
I think there's
but he says it's my self-righteous suicide. Like he's speaking from his own perspective.
I'm pretty sure there's a line that does make it more explicit, but I certainly can't be bothered to go look it up.
You know what? Let's just go with it is. It has a twist, a shocking twist that none of us realize. And I think one thing that's kind of funny about the punk rock opera is that a lot of the heavy lifting for the plot is done by these 2 9-minute tracks. One is the second track called Jesus of Suburbia, which was a big single, had a big, epic, horrible music video. And then the second last track is called Homecoming, which is 10 minutes long, which is probably longer than any song Green Day has ever recorded. And I think, Giordano, part of why you might have not noticed the punk rock opera is that it's largely limited to these 2 tracks, and then some of the back half tracks that lag, like Letter Bomb or Give Me Novocaine. They'll drop little lines like the Jesus of Suburbia was a lie, but they'll drop the names of the characters in these other tracks that have nothing to do with them. But there isn't a very strong through line like there is in something like Tommy.
Yeah, so Ben, I mean, you have a point here that the punk rock opera is punctuated by songs that have nothing to do with plot, and they totally break up the flow. I disagree with this point because one of the most emotionally affecting points of the album for me was the transition from Holiday to Boulevard of Broken Dreams that keeps that same note.
Yeah.
And in the story, what's happening here is Jesus of Suburbia has decided to leave his hometown, and Holiday walks you through the euphoria of making that change, right? Of leaving your hometown and going to big city, and it immediately runs into Boulevard of Broken Dreams, which is a very sad song about being alone. And that had an effect on me a lot because I think it really does evoke the feeling that you get when you decide to make a change in your life that's hard, right? And what happens is, let's say that you have a tough decision to make. At first, you're euphoric because you've made this positive change, but then you actually have to live with the reality of that change, which is hard. It's the reason why you haven't done it yet. It's actually a hard thing to do, like moving to a new city, right? You get there and it's all exciting, and then you have to live with the reality of being in a new city where you don't know anybody. And that movement from Holiday to Boulevard of Broken Dreams really worked for me. It really captured that sense of making a change in your life and then having to live with the reality of that change, which is often very difficult.
Yeah, no, that tracks. And interestingly, and again, I don't want to front load this because we're going to talk about the stupid Broadway musical, but when they were trying to mangle this into a musical with a plot, in Broadway, characters frequently have an I want song. So if you think of something like The Lion King, the one song that explains everything you need to know about Simba's character is I just can't wait to be king. He's a little kid, he's impulsive, he wants to be fucking king, right? It spoon feeds you everything you need to know. But as they were just picking the meat off the bones of this punk rock opera to try and make a musical, Boulevard of Broken Dreams was the closest they had to an I want song, which is I want to not be lonely anymore.
Boulevard of Broken Dreams is so funny because it is a 32-year-old man talking about I walk alone. And I just find that as a 32-year-old man, what I want more than anything is to be alone. I want people to leave me alone. The main issue I have in my life is that there's too many people that require your time and attention. And it's as a teenager that tracks, right? Yeah. You're I feel so fucking lonely. And then as a 30-year-old man, you're damn, what I wouldn't kill for some fucking alone time, right?
Yeah, I initially thought this was just a very cynical grab at the angsty teenage demographic. And then I did more and more research on William Joseph Armstrong. And I actually have come to the conclusion that he is a deeply lonely and sad man. He still talks about how in 1994, when he signed to a major label, he was kicked out of the Gilman Street Collective, this punk venue, and he wasn't allowed to play with his friends anymore. And it's like, I think he just is sad and lonely.
Well, that and the apparently extremely traumatizing breakup that occurred at the same time of, there's this woman, Amanda, who I guess was part of that scene. And she sounds like a badass, but she basically accused him of selling out, which, imagine saying that 1994 is the time that Green Day sold out. That being the time that you draw the line in the sand.
5 years before Good Riddance.
So
that is like the ultimate mark of shame for a Gen X person is selling out, right? That's like they're being canceled or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the worst thing you can do.
So their career, arguably before it really starts, like before Duke, takes them to any type of popularity, they've already sold out in the eyes of their closest friends and this extremely meaningful first love that he seems to have, who he's still writing songs about. Like there's like 5 different songs attributed to this Amanda.
Yeah, across albums, like She and Sassafras Roots from Dookie, Time of Your Life, or from fucking Nimrod. 2 songs on American Idiot are in reference to this 10-year-old relationship.
Yeah, well, What's Her Name is apparently basically built around this woman who, again, sounds like a badass and just straight up moved to Ecuador so she could be somewhere without McDonald's.
Yes, awesome. Join the Peace Corps.
And called him a sellout and like broke his heart. So he loses his friends, he loses his community, he loses this love, and it seems like he's never recovered from really.
Yeah. So it's sad. And like the plot of the musical, one thing I find particularly interesting about it is so much about the suburbs. Like they name check drinking in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven or whatever, and like being bored and disaffected in the suburbs. And we talked about this in the politics of the thing. But when you compare it to Green Day in the early 90s, they literally moved to the city. Like they are all from like shitty little towns far from the East Bay of San Francisco. Billy Joe's father dies when he's 10 and has like a shitty childhood, drops out of high school at 16, moves to the East Bay, and they have a song about it called Welcome to Paradise, about moving into like a shit part of town that comes to be home and paradise like. And now 10 years later, they're writing punk music that is about and for the suburbs, which I think says something about like, I don't know, settlement patterns of that era.
Yeah. I don't know what exactly is the moral of the story here, that you should move back to the suburbs and embrace having a boring life, because the ending is What's Her Name, but to me that's more of like an epilogue. Like you can remove it from the story and it doesn't really affect anything. But so Homecoming is really the ending, and what happens in Homecoming is, after St. Jimmy kills himself, he gets like an office job pushing papers and in the city, and he's bored to death, and so he quits that job and goes home to the suburbs, and it's like he's going to be less bored there, like he's going to return to like drinking in the parking lot, which I think he explicitly mentions. I just don't understand how he is happy.
Well, I think that's the whole thing. Like it's fundamentally a nihilist, message of like, you can leave, you can try and get out of the suburb, go to the city and try and start a new life or reinvent yourself, but at the end of the day, you're going to crawl in back and you're going to settle back into this thing that you hate, and you're going to hate your life until you die. Basically, is the message of this album.
Unless you can become a rock star. Because in Homecoming, the most incongruous little bit.
Oh my God, it makes no sense. Rock and Roll Girlfriend.
I love it. The story behind Homecoming is that each one of the 3 guys wrote a 30-second song, and then they would throw it to one another. And Trey Cool, the jester and jokester of the group, just clearly loves his life, because he wrote a song called Rock and Roll Girlfriend about how he's got a rock and roll band, he's got a rock and roll life, he's got a rock and roll girlfriend, and a rock and roll ex-wife. Got a kid in New York, got a kid in the Bay. He's doing great.
Yeah, so I looked up, like, I was like, what the fuck is happening here? Like, we're talking about cryptic, and people are like, oh, this is a letter that he gets from a friend from the scene who's like, don't complain to me. Like, I got my own problems, and I'm a rock star now. And I'm like, that's not written into the lyrics at all. It just out of nowhere is like, I got a rock and roll band or whatever. And it's like, how do I know that this is a letter? That part makes no sense. It really does seem like what you described, like the songwriting was just from 3 different people, and they made no effort to like make it conquest or anything. Because what's the point of that rock and roll girlfriend part?
It's awesome to be a rock star, dude.
Yeah, I guess that's the moral. Is like, listen, either you fucking succeed and you become a rock star and you have your own problems, like having kids in a different part of the country, or like your life sucks and you have to go back to the suburbs and drink into the 7-Eleven parking lot again.
Well, I think
it is the shittiest ending.
I think in the musical, they again, there's a lot of sort of post hoc just building things in to try and make it seem like there's a congruent story, but I think it's supposed to be like he returns to the suburbs, someone that he used to hang out with like shows up, and that's what that guy's doing, and it's supposed to set up this contrast between like what Jesus of Suburbia has now settled for and how he no longer fits in with his old life, and old life doesn't really want him anymore. And like I think they flush that out, but it's completely obtuse in the album. Like that's not obvious at all. It just, and I remember listening to it when I was 13 and being like, I love this part and I don't get it at all.
Yeah, so if there is a story here, it really just, it doesn't seem to have, and you can have an ending that's nihilistic. I just don't know that this does a particularly good job of like illustrating why this should be satisfying in any way.
Yeah, no, it's you can't fix the vibes.
But again, they did nail the zeitgeist of the time, and I think that's part of why it's so popular.
100%, it captured like suburban angst so well. Like shitty, crummy, like suburban angst and ennui is baked into this album, and it really comes across. And we're all biased because like we spent the 2000s in a fucking air-conditioned basement listening to this album, and there really was so much art this decade about suburban angst and ennui, like The Garden State, About Schmidt, American Beauty, The Sopranos, Donnie Darko, The Butterfly Effect, Truman Show. They even started remaking suburban angst movies from other eras in this decade, like Revolutionary Road, and they remade Stepford Wives and A Serious Man. There's this like disaffected person in the suburbs thing that's going on at that point, and it's where we were all living. I think it's because there's a contrast between like how you feel right now, which is everybody feels bad about like war and just like how fake everything is, but you're surrounded by like nice weather in California and these beautiful suburbs, and there's this cognitive dissonance that's in your head where it's like, why do I feel so bad and why is everything around me so nice?
Is this all there is? Yeah, my favorite subgenre of the shitty suburban thing is, what if someone from the suburbs just fucking went nuts, man? like don't test me. And this is not necessarily like going nuts, but I'm thinking there are 2 shows at the end of the decade that are about suburban people dealing drugs, because Breaking Bad starts in 2009, and less dark and gritty, you have the show Weeds, which is also like it literally opens with the song Little Boxes, which is a 1960s folk song about how fake and lame the suburbs are and how it's like cookie cutter conformity. And yeah, 40 years later, people are still living that way.
That's so funny because that's absolutely the mindset everybody was in. They even had those shows like, targeting female audiences, like Desperate Housewives and Pretty Little Liars, both premiere in this decade. And they're both about like, what if the suburbs, like there was actually something exciting here? There was a murder, like a grisly murder.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it might look boring, but you don't know what we're like, man. We're fucking crazy. I think the one huge major blind spot of this, and maybe this should have been in like the politics section, but when you think about people complaining about how bad America is now and American life is now, they're going to talk about racism. Like they're going to do like, this is such a blind spotted white person problem where it's like, man, I feel bad in the suburbs. It's like
the vibes are off. Like
Yeah, there's nothing about like economic inequality. There's nothing about race. Nothing about any like actual like structural issues. It's just like president bad, news bad, vibes bad, solutions none.
Yeah. that should be the title of the episode. What is to be done about our vibes, Colin? Nothing.
Wait, you know what Mark said about the vibes?
Like my relationship with the album is, loved it when it came out, totally get it. I was 13. Look, revisiting it now and being like, this is extremely corny. It is catchy. It's also corny and fundamentally. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, also nailed it. Like, frankly, it doesn't have any lasting impact because it doesn't sound like music now. So it's hard to like get into it, I think. And there's no, like, you wouldn't be able to get a new audience into this album because it's a time capsule sound wise. But like all the problems that it's, again, not solving or really analyzing in any way, but just like describing. I don't know. I feel like it's only gotten worse. And like, I think there's, if anything, there's like way more frighteningly disaffected youth in suburbs. Now they're just all planning school instead of listening to it.
Well, they're all online now.
Right.
Oh yeah, the internet doesn't get like name dropped at all in this.
That's true.
That's kind of
Yeah, all of your angst is happening in the real world.
It's happening in 7-Eleven bathrooms where you're breaking mirrors and graffitiing.
True.
Yeah, and I guess before we move on to the Broadway musical, building off what Kyle said about how it had no lasting impact, Green Day's next album in 2009, I cannot stress this enough, is the same album. Yeah, all of the track titles are different, but it is also a punk rock opera. The main character, instead of being named Jesus of Suburbia, is named Christian. It has the exact same mix of like really fast tight punk and then really slow maudlin self-indulgent fucking emo tunes like 21
Did Billy
Guns.
Joe listen to his own advice about kicking the trash can over?
He did not. And yeah, that album like did not sell nearly as well. Like it had the very annoying and repetitive song "Know Your Enemy." Do you know your enemy? Which I like to think it's not Billy Joe challenging the audience. Do you know your enemy? He's earnestly asking, do you know your enemy? Are you my mom? Let's move on. Final section, the fucking musical.
The motherfucking Broadway motherfucking musical.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this musical. It made $40 million on Broadway. I counted over 29 cities that it ran in. It was nominated for Best Musical Tony in 2010. And it fits a pattern that we have about topics on this show and that they're still being remade today. Almost everything we talk about, we're always like, oh, and there's another one coming out this year. And this is true of this musical. They still make it.
Yeah. So as we said, there's this very minimalist plot. They flesh it out. The thing is, the American Idiot album is like maybe 40 minutes long tops, and that's not long enough for a Broadway musical. So they take all the songs for that next album, 21st Century Breakdown, and they flesh it out with this insanely complicated story. It really is throwing a dart in the wall and drawing a bullseye over it. So instead of just Jesus of Suburbia, you have 3 suburban guys. You have, and I don't know all of their names. It's like Tunny.
What is with the name Tunny? Because this is a de novo character that came up with that they could have named anything, and they picked Tunny, which I can only imagine if you were sitting in the audience, you would constantly be turning to the person next to you to be like, "What are they, Tunny? Are they saying Tunny, or am I not hearing it correctly?"
So we have 3 guys: Tunny, Jesus of Suburbia, and the other one, and they all 3 of them get a love interest girl. So they split what's her name and the extraordinary girl, which on the original album referred to the same woman. Now they get split into 2. Neither of them named characters, and a third woman by the name of Heather. So you have the extraordinary girl, what's her name, and Heather, plus Saint Jimmy, and I think probably some more characters. It's almost entirely sung through, but they'll have 30 seconds of dialogue to try and just really scrape what little meat is on the bones of this content.
Oh my God. So I watched this. I think it's the second worst thing I've ever watched for this podcast. Absolute Boondock Saints 2. It's brutal. And I was hoping that they would use the dialogue to make it more clear what was happening, right? Because I understand that as an album, like a music album, American Idiot has to appeal to this like mass audience, and they can't write it like a straight story. I'm like, okay, that's fine. They'll put in dialogue to make it more like a traditional musical, so I know what's going on. And they just didn't do that. Not what happened. And then they added new songs into this, which I thought at first meant, oh, they'll put in new songs that do a better job with exposition. Not what happened. They're so confusing. I think about 5 times while I was watching this musical, I just yelled at the TV, what is going on? What is happening? Charles Isherwood of the New York Times commented that the show contained, quote, characters who lacked much in the way of emotional depth or specificity, or plot lines that are simple to the point of crudity. And that's an incredibly accurate description.
Yeah, I saw the headline for one review that was like, geez, could you have spared us a plot?
Well, they did.
My main complaint about musicals traditionally is that they have too much exposition. Characters will get on stage and be like, I feel that I'm going through something very difficult. And it's like, I'll never make that complaint again, because I now understand why they do that. It's so you don't have the experience that you have in American Idiot, where you're just like, why, who's who, what's happening? Nothing makes any sense. It's just as fucking cryptic as the album. And now there's 3 times as many characters. There's 18 actors in this musical. 18!
That includes like, yeah, all the chorus members and dancers and everything for barely a story that had 3 characters. 2 if St. Jimmy is not real. As I was watching this, I was as frustrated with Giordano because huge plot driving events happen essentially through mime as the songs are going on. So one of the major plot points is that of the 3 suburban characters, one of them has to stay home because he got his girlfriend Heather pregnant. But this is not anywhere in the lyrics of any of the Green Day content. So as they're singing Jesus of Suburbia, you have this woman, like, she opens a pregnancy test. She kind of reacts to it. She goes to him. It's like entirely pantomimed. And the closest you get to it is that there's the breakdown in Jesus of Suburbia, which is, I am not ashamed, I won't apologize, when there's no one else to go. But like, that has nothing to do with pregnancy or whatever. Like, it ends with tales from another broken home, and she's trying to keep the home together by making him stay. Like, it's insane. It's all through pantomime, and it's incredibly hard to follow. So the idea I had was that we almost had it. American Idiot didn't need to be a Broadway musical. What it needed to be was a 1920s silent film with title cards explaining precisely what's happening. And that way we can really cut down the fluff. Just leave the music, leave the pantomime, no dialogue. So I present to you my script for Usonian simpleton. Usonian, a word I learned when looking for an archaic word for American. It's literally like USA turned into an adjective. So we have our dramatis personae. So instead of Jesus of Suburbia, we have Hampton's Joshua, a flaming youth who needs to find himself a dame, a real butter and eggs man. This is all real 1920s slang, just FYI. Instead of St. Jimmy, we have Papist Jacques, a cool cat, a drugstore cowboy. And instead of what's her name, we have that nameless trollop, a flapper girl. But she's no dumb Dora. Okay, here's how I envision it going. We have those first 4 opening chords of Jesus of Suburbia. Bow, 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 bow. Title card. Egads, it's time for me to dust out of this one-horse town. There's too much baloney and flim-flam. All we need. It's done. Then we have the opening of Boulevard of Broken Dreams. We'll have Scooter put it on post. Title card. I'm walking this main drag, but I gotta get me a gal with great gams. A real broad, a canary, a chick, a chippy, a flapper, or a dish. That's it. That's all we need from Boulevard. Open chord, the opening chord of St. Jimmy. We have a man with a stripy French mime shirt and a pencil mustache who starts cavorting about. Title card. It's Papist Jacques, the dope peddler and reefer addict of these parts. We'll have a little musical numbers, some dancing. Title card that says, meet me down at the speakeasy, fella. We'll get smoked and throw lead at any coppers who come our way. More drinking and dancing. Opening chord of She's a Rebel. We have a quick succession of title cards. She's a looker. She's a flapper. She's a dish. She's a babe, a bim, a babe, and she's dangerous. And then we close with Hampton Joshua looking sad and morose. We have the music of what's her name? It says, I lost that gal, and now I wonder how that nameless trollop is. Finn.
That makes so much more sense.
Quite a powerful experience hearing you describe and read out silent film bit by bit for an audio format.
It's called the silent talkie.
Like the closed caption version of a silent movie where you get all the little descriptions of what they're doing as well. The trollop enters.
It was so needed in this musical, honestly. Like you said, Ben, they're trying to do 3 times as many stories and characters with the same lyrics as the album. It's like your boss telling you need to do more with less. It's not possible. It's the same album. You can't do 3 times as many characters with the same songs. It doesn't make any fucking sense.
I do philosophically support theater and musicals, and I think they should exist, and I support the people who do them. But I don't like them in them, and I'm glad there are people that love them. But I do get a very cringy feeling anytime I watch musical theater. This, though, it should not exist. It simply shouldn't be. Like, it's not good at all. And I only made it through 5 minutes of it, and I just couldn't do it. It's so corny. It's so bad. And theater is corny, and music corny part of the aesthetic. But woof,
You're right. Yeah, no, I think that really summarizes like why this doesn't work. Is musicals are sincere and camp, and they're a little cringe, but that's fine because you're sort of celebrating that. And punk is the opposite, right? Punk music is cynical and disaffected and apathetic, and it's just impossible to make punk sound this sincere and corny. It's an unholy combination.
Choreographing the moshings.
Yes.
Stop it. Just do whatever.
Musicals have extended dance sequences where everybody's choreographed dancing together, and punk dancing is frenetic and spontaneous. It's antithetical to the idea of doing it with 10 people in unison.
Yeah, it's all the dancing in this musical is terrible because what can you do except have everyone thrash around and awkwardly headbang near each other?
There's a lot of air guitaring,
jumping up and down on beds.
If you want to get a taste for this, there's a Tony's performance you can watch on YouTube where, like, for a solid minute, three of the leads are just sitting on couches and beds. That's the dancing that they do. And the one character, the one suburban guy who just stays home, he spends the entire play sitting on his couch. That's his plot line. He just sits on his couch and drinks.
Yeah, what is his arc supposed to do? I guess
he's the one who can't leave
because he's got a girl pregnant, and then he just drinks at home.
Yeah, so he sings on the Give Me Novocaine track,
and then she leaves him for a rock and roll player.
Yeah, so that they can awkwardly fit in the rock and roll life song.
But what's his arc? How does what he wants and what he needs sort of mix at the end to give us a satisfying conclusion?
Somehow at the end he reconciles with his girl and he's able to be in his child's life, but unclear how that happens.
Oh man, brutal.
Also obligatory, of the three roles for women in this play, two of them are not named. What's her name and the extraordinary girl.
Oh, I mean, this play doesn't even come close to passing the Bechdel test, like, at all. All of the women just act as, oh, this one is this guy's love interest. This one is this guy's love interest. They have no motivations of their own. They never speak to each other. Nothing happens to them that doesn't involve, oh, she doesn't want him anymore, or she's making his life better. They kind of turn what's her name into a bit of a manic pixie dream girl.
Yeah.
But it just fixes his problem.
Did you guys watch the Jesus of Suburbia music video?
Oh yeah.
The portrayal of the girlfriend in that is extremely problematic. The whole opening sequence, which is just Jesus of Suburbia, ostensibly protagonist of the song, just being horrendously abusive to her.
Just verbally abusing this poor woman.
And like physically intimidating her.
I think he sexually assaults her because he does all three.
I don't know. It's somehow this musical made me extremely pessimistic about punk in general and cast it into this weird negative light for me of being like, I guess that's as artificial in a weird, but like seeing this literal artificial representation just made me feel like, yes, even the real thing is fake.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been commodified. Like you say, it's a time capsule. It's a snapshot. The punk aesthetic of the Broadway musical is, this commodified version of late 90s, early 2000s punk as it's turning into pop punk. But they're still making punk music. It's just now about social anxiety or what have you. It's like stuff like Bomb the Music Industry or Jeff Rosenstock. They're going to talk about, I don't know, it's still a kind of disaffectedness, but they don't cultivate the same kind of, I don't know, habitus, to put it in the pretentious fucking academic language, I guess.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking that same thing at first. That what is punk rock about dressing up in a costume and reading set lines and performing for people for $80 a ticket? Which, by the way, these tickets were $80 each. You are very unwell if you spent $80 at the height of the Great Recession to go see this musical.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you deserve to be parted from your money.
Yeah. I just assumed, by the way, that this is what the entire audience was thinking the whole time they were there. Nice. Anyway, I was like, oh, well, maybe punk's about subverting expectations. And so, like, actually doing a musical is the most punk thing you can do because it's, like, the least expected.
Kicking the garbage can over, man. No punk has ever done this before.
But again, it's a very tough job, and you have to be good enough to do it. And I just don't think that they were up for it. One of the worst qualities of the musical I found was everyone's, like, really tired from all the moshing. And so they're breathing extremely heavily throughout.
Yeah.
And so here's a little clip to give you an example of, like, in the few scenes of dialogue, here's what it sounds like because they're so out of breath.
February 2nd. I jerked off into oblivion last night. And today, I forgot to shower. Again. Oh well, it doesn't matter. I'm just gonna be up well. And Connie, and the usual suspects for another afternoon of shit talking. And cigarettes. And blah, fucking blah. Hey, God save you, skin me alive. Or was that your stepdad?
Also, Donald Trump went to the opening night of American Idiot. Red carpet, Donald J. Trump, 2009 or 10, whenever it was, went to go see the punk rock opera musical.
Jesus. What? That is the most striking thing.
What do you think his thoughts were? Well,
it's very good. It's the best musical I've ever seen. This, I mean, I don't know. This doesn't sound like Billy Joel at all. I was told it was a Billy Joel musical.
I was hoping they'd play Piano Man personally, but the new stuff is pretty exciting.
What's her name? Sadly, no longer a 10.
What's her name? Oh, Tiffany? Right, okay.
The documentary was interesting, mostly, again, again for the glimpse behind the curtain of Billy Joel's psyche, where he does like explicitly say, well, within the first 5 minutes, there's a little, talking head bit with him, and he says, my biggest worry was that it was going to be corny, and that was the moment that I was like, oh, dog, I'm so sorry. I have very bad news from the future. But it is hard to imagine, especially when you think about old Green Day, like slacker stoner kids. It's hard to imagine the idea of a Broadway musical about their music, especially one that is so.
When they're recording the album, in Heart Like a Hand Grenade, they literally make a joke about this. It's like, oh yeah, this album's gonna be so big, it's gonna be on Broadway. We're gonna put it on ice. This is like a go-to punchline for them.
Yeah, but then when you actually meet them, and again, this is I think part of why I was thinking about like parallels between punk kids and who ultimately underneath it all, they are all dorks, and I mean that in like an affectionate way. It's just that like musical theater kids, they're open about it, roll with it, and punks at the end of the day, as dorky, they're just showing it or like reacting to that and kind of leaning out of it instead of leaning into it, I guess. But like, I don't know, I think that's what really struck me. And Billy Joel
again.
Oh no, I'm just saying it now. I can't not. And Billy Joe, yeah, just like this extended sequence where he talks about how lonely he has been, how he hasn't had community, hasn't had friends, and finding that and seeing fundamentally how dorky Green Day is. All three of them really are earnest works, which I respect for just doing their thing. But I was like, okay, actually, this makes a ton of sense to me. Like I think I had to see that sequence and them talking about Billy Joe, like talking about finding community and by the musical and how when you're in a show, your family and all of this. And I think it just like helped me. It just really clicked for me why this thing happened and why they were actually so excited about it. And again, there's like parallels between disaffected punks and dorky theater kids. And I was like, actually, they're almost the same. Like they're the same opposite sides of the coin.
Yeah, maybe we're not so different after all.
Exactly.
They both wear makeup.
Well, exactly. No, that's exactly it. The other one of the main guys in the musical, who's like the guy who's sort of putting it all together and running it. But he's as earnest and as dorky about everything in the way he talks about how big the ideas are, and then you watch what he's describing and you're like, this sounds like shit, but okay. I'm glad you're really stoked about it.
Yeah. They changed the set by introducing just like a different couch or mattress.
A different flophouse futon.
Which is fine. You can do that. It's like, okay, tickets are $80. I don't know.
Yeah.
They were doing too much. I think we can all agree. Also, musicals are supposed to be fun. I just saw Six, which is the musical about the 6 wives of Henry VIII. Admittedly, like a dark subject. And it's so much fun. There's jokes. It's hilarious. Musicals, even if it's about dark subject matter, like often have like a big expression of joy.
Yeah, dude, Cabaret is about the fucking Holocaust and still has fun songs.
One of the characters signs up for the army and gets his leg blown off.
If I were to describe to you, it's like, yeah, we have 3 disaffected, punky suburban youth who are going to move to the big city. And then shortly after that, one of them joins the army. You'd be like, what?
Yeah, is that the demographic?
Is that?
So the plot in the play is that he sees like a very manly guy who has like a lot of girls. And
Favorite Son, a song. This is one written for the musical.
He sees like a guy who gets a lot of chicks, and so he decides to join the army. Like, oh yeah, that's what punks do. They see a guy who gets girls in a suit, and they join the army.
If there's one thing punks love, it's a man in uniform. Can't get enough hierarchy and structure.
There was some interview I saw with someone like asked a question about, you think you've grown up? And he just like explicitly is like, well, what were we gonna do? Like just keep writing songs about sitting around and getting high? Like we're 30. You can't do that.
It's about them growing up from this like stoner rock band to like a more serious rock band, because you can't just keep writing stoner songs. I guess you can. Look at Willie Nelson or something. But...
had Bob Marley lived.
Oh no. All right, let's walk this out. Have you guys heard Bob Marley's new song, Showing Up on Time is Late, Showing Up 5 minutes early is on time?
I didn't elect this sheriff. I did elect the deputy. We really don't need to say much about later Green Day. Suffice it to say, it's just not good.
I feel like music, almost more than any other genre, is affected by the times they're like, good directors can make great movies into their 70s, but there's something about music where like, when you're young, you can capture the zeitgeist of whatever's happening and put out this great art that everybody loves, and it just slips away from you. And I feel like the goal of any musician is to just hold on to it as hard as you can, like for as long as you can. And some people do it very successfully and some people don't. And
Yeah, and I think part of that involves a lot of very self-conscious transformation. Like I think one artist who definitely did would be someone like David Bowie, who has hits in like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. I haven't listened to too much of his 90s stuff, but like David Bowie stayed relevant a stupidly long time.
Also Weird Al.
No. Scooter, take that out. Yeah,
Okay.
so let's summarize.
Yeah, closing thoughts on Green Day.
What value do protest songs hold? Do they inspire real change, or do they just sublimate our unrest into something harmless? And is catharsis like enough of a goal for music?
Yeah, I have a take on this, which is I think that protest music has value and political music has value as a first step. Or if you look at someone like The Clash with their song, they have a song called Washington Bullets. It's like a little history lesson about all of the US imperialism in Latin America. I think that has value, but as long as consuming the music isn't as far as the action goes, I think that's where the value lies. Whereas it's the same kind of stopping before the process is done, where you see with like modern liberals in the media, that their program is watch way too much cable news and then vote once in a while. And that's all the politics you need to do, citizen, in your day-to-day life. I think the value of protest music is like the gateway drug into doing more stuff, like maybe supporting mutual aid networks or supporting unions or like actually doing some kind of political action on the ground. As long as you keep that goal in mind, I think that's the value in protest music. And you can see some of the earliest protest folk music is pro-union striking songs, right? It's there in the history. We've just kind of lost it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. You know, we're so political now, and yet the only political engagement you do is, you know, read the news and vote for your and donate to the Democratic Party. It was so funny how as soon as Roe v. Wade happened, you just got all these emails from Nancy Pelosi being like, we need your money because of this thing that happened.
Yeah. I can just imagine like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, all these Democratic crypt keepers just hanging on to life like fucking Mr. Burns. As soon as Roe was overturned, they just like rubbed their hands together and licked their lips like, oh, here we go. I'm getting another fridge.
Yeah, I don't know how to talk about this without, I don't know, being a huge fucking downer, but I think it's fascinating because, you know, the protest music of the 21st century is weak sauce, right? Like for the most part, it's just saying like, you're bad and I wish someone else was there. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting when you compare it to all the Irish protest music. That's like literally about direct action as a major euphemism.
Yeah, there's literally a song that's like, hey, come out and fight me.
Yes.
Come out, sugar like in towns, come out and fight me like a man.
And your ability to intervene, to do direct action, to do these things is just steadily being neutered and steadily being contained. Like what can you do? And I think maybe that's part of why protest music is not as much of a thing now, because what can it be the stepping stone to? What can it possibly spur you on to? Think of how many protests there have been over the past like 10 years. Trump and Roe v. Wade and all, and like abortion was just effectively criminalized in America. Where were the big protests? Like everyone's even kind of given up on those because how many huge marches and protests were in like the early Trump days and all of that, it didn't amount to anything. And I think we've just totally absorbed that.
I think the protest music maybe just needs to be like pointed at something. And in the 60s, the protest music was pointed at the draft. And so I think it did a good job of ending the war because it was pointed at like an actual thing. And the government has gotten very good at not asking anything from you. Like they're going to do atrocities in Iraq, but like it's not going to affect your life at all. You can just keep on eating Funyuns and like watching like ABC or whatever. It's not actually
Tiger King season 2, you gotta watch it.
Right. And so I don't know, maybe if there was a protest song that actually pointed towards doing abortions in states where it's illegal or something like that, maybe it would be more effective than like a general vibes bad.
Yeah. And even with the example of the draft, the goal in the 60s was end the Vietnam War, end the draft. And the funny thing is ending the draft was the greatest divide and conquer strategy that they did against the hippies and all those like interrelated movements of like women's liberation, LGBTQ liberation, Black liberation, the counterculture, all those were interrelated. Then they got rid of the draft and all of the white people went home. Like that's such a big part of how the boomers became boomers, is they were willing to get out in the streets, maybe throw some bricks at cops or what have you, when they had skin in the game, when it was like, when I might be shipped off to Vietnam. And I think part of it is we've gradually chipped away. I mean, thanks to the suburbs and white flight and being comfy, we've chipped away at the people who have skin in the game. That's like a great way to disincentivize protest.
I don't think we actually have any complaints about its description of suburban bleakness. Like we actually say that it gets a lot more right about that than it does about protesting.
Yeah, or politics. politics.
Okay. Yeah. I think.
Yeah, I think we got it.
All right.
Excellent. All right. If you're Billy Joe Armstrong and you listen to this pod with almost 1,000 listeners, 1,000 plays, I want you to know that I will be your friend. If you're lonely, you can come to my place. I know how to play a lot of your songs on guitar. If you want to jam, if you want to play Xbox and chill, that's cool too. I know you're trying to stay sober now. We can do a clean hang. It's all good. You don't need to be lonely.
Let's go fucking drink in the 7-Eleven bar. Or sorry, you don't want to drink, but let's have some fucking LaCroix in the 7-Eleven parking lot.
Yeah, man. I promise you, our vibes are on point.
So I just thought of one more after you mentioned Tiger King, Billy Joe Exotic.
Billy Joe Exotic.
Nice.
We live in troubled times.